The table was already set like a stage waiting for its cruel performance. The long white cloth spread perfectly, the crystal glasses gleaming, the silver cutlery catching the glow of the chandelier above. Every detail spoke of elegance, of wealth, of family pride, but beneath the shine was a sickness I knew too well. These dinners were never about love or closeness. They were showcases for my father to bask in admiration and for my mother to pretend she was the queen of a castle built on lies. Relatives filled the seats, uncles and aunts who rarely cared to check on me during the year, cousins who only spoke to me in whispers when no one was looking, neighbors and business partners who were there to smile and applaud my father's stories. I sat quietly, the good daughter, the invisible one, trying not to draw attention, but attention always found me in the worst ways. My father held court as usual, his voice booming, his glass of wine raised like a microphone as he retold old stories where he was always the hero, always the clever one, always the man who triumphed. Laughter circled the table. Cameras clicked as phones recorded his every word, his every gesture. He loved it, the validation, the approval. I forced myself to keep eating small bites of roast beef, potato salad I could barely taste because I was holding my breath, waiting for the moment he would turn his performance on me. It happened sooner than I wanted. My uncle, trying to break the monotony, asked me a simple question about my work. I opened my mouth to answer, a chance to speak for once, but before I could get 3 words out, my father cut me off with a grin that carried no warmth. "She has always been better seen than heard," he announced to the entire room. A few chuckles followed, the kind that sting more than outright mockery because they pretend to be harmless. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. He was not finished. "You know what? Let's make her useful," he said loudly, making sure every guest could hear. "She is not contributing to the conversation. At least she can contribute to the decor." My mind raced, but my body did not move. Before I could process, before I could even breathe, his hand was at the back of my head, large and unyielding, and with a swift, violent shove, he smashed my face down into my plate. Mashed potatoes, gravy, and meat pressed hard against my skin. Heat and sting rushed through me as the sharp edge of the plate scraped my cheek. A gasp erupted around the table, followed quickly by laughter. Some laughed nervously, others laughed freely as if it were the best joke of the evening. I lifted my head slowly, bits of food clinging to my face, strands of hair soaked with sauce, the humiliation dripping from me in every sense. He leaned back in his chair, beaming as though he had delivered the punchline of his greatest story. "There," he declared, pointing at me for everyone to see. "Now she matches the table." More laughter, more chuckles, the clinking of glasses in a chorus of cruelty. I could see the flashes of phones, the glint of camera lenses. Some cousins tried to stifle their amusement, tilting their screens away when my eyes met theirs. My father sat like a king, smug in the applause. Then my mother, elegant in her dress, her diamonds catching the chandelier's light, took a sip of her wine and laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a shocked laugh, a laugh of pure delight. She looked at me with a cold smirk and said, "At least now you are worth looking at." The words sliced deeper than the plate had. Laughter rippled again, this time bolder because she had given her approval. The air pressed heavy against my chest. I wanted to cry, but I knew tears would be his triumph. He wanted to see me break. He wanted the room to see me crumble. My hands trembled as I wiped gravy and mashed potatoes from my cheek with a napkin. My ears roared with the sound of my own heartbeat, every thump screaming humiliation. Inside, I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never return. But another feeling burned hotter than shame. Rage. It sparked quietly, smoldering beneath my skin as I sat there forcing myself to chew another bite, swallow the taste of food mixed with humiliation, and hold my head as high as I could manage. Crying would have given him victory. Silence would buy me time. That was the night my father thought he owned the room, thought he had broken me in front of everyone, thought the show belonged to him. He did not know that by pushing my face into that plate, by letting my mother laugh and brand me as worthless, he had given me something far more powerful than their approval. He had given me the spark of a plan. To understand why that night carried such weight, you have to see the truth behind the mask my family wore for the world. From the outside, we looked like the picture of success, a wealthy family with a grand house, luxury cars in the driveway, and carefully staged photographs posted on holidays to show off our unity. My father was the mastermind behind that illusion, a businessman who thrived on being admired, who craved the praise of neighbors and business partners as though it were oxygen. He believed in appearances more than he believed in love, and he treated every family gathering as if it were his personal stage. My mother played her role with precision, a woman dressed in jewels and silk, smiling at the right moments, whispering compliments to guests, making sure the performance never faltered. She was not warm, not maternal, but she knew how to keep people fooled into thinking she was graceful and caring. The truth was colder than the champagne she served. My sister Madison fit perfectly into their play, the golden child, the one who mirrored all their values. She was praised endlessly, her achievements flaunted like trophies. When Madison entered a room, the spotlight followed her. My father's chest swelled with pride. My mother's eyes softened, and the guests showered her with approval. She was the daughter they wanted, the daughter who validated the image they had built. Then there was me, the invisible one, the shadow they kept at the edge of the frame. At family photos, I was placed to the side, never in the center. At dinners, my voice was drowned out if I dared speak at all. My grades, my work, my efforts were met with silence or mockery. I was not their pride. I was their contrast, the one they used to make Madison shine brighter. Every time I tried to contribute, it became ammunition for ridicule. If I offered to help cook, my mother would sneer that I only made a mess. If I mentioned school, my father would laugh that no one cared about my trivial pursuits. And yet, despite all of this, they still paraded me at events because in their twisted way, my existence helped their image. A family with 2 daughters looked better than a family that doted on one, and my quiet obedience filled the role of balance in their show. The hypocrisy was endless. They spoke of unity, but behind closed doors, the air was thick with criticism and comparison. They spoke of love, but their affection was a weapon they withheld. They spoke of respect, but respect was reserved only for each other and for Madison. I became skilled at disappearing, at lowering my head, at staying small, so as not to provoke another round of jokes at my expense. But invisibility was its own punishment. At school, I envied classmates whose parents cheered for them, who were hugged, who were told they mattered. At home, I was reminded daily that my worth was conditional, tied to silence, tied to staying out of the way. When people praised our family from the outside, when they called us admirable, when they complimented the bond they thought we shared, a hollow ache grew inside me. They did not see the cruelty behind the polished smiles. They did not see my mother's sharp whispers when the cameras turned off. They did not see my father's mocking smirk when guests left. They did not see Madison's triumphant grin each time I was belittled. I learned early that the truth and the image were 2 entirely different worlds. The truth was that I lived in a house where perfection was demanded and cruelty was excused. The truth was that I was a prop in their play, a backdrop to their glory and nothing more. That was the stage set long before the night of the dinner. That was the script I was forced to follow until the night everything changed. The night of the dinner was not the first time my father chose to use me as a prop for his cruelty. It was simply the most public. Control was his language, and humiliation his favorite tool. From childhood, I learned that every gathering carried the risk of becoming his stage for another performance at my expense. At birthday parties, he would mock my gifts to others by announcing loudly that I had no sense of taste, laughing as guests smiled awkwardly. At weddings, he would shove me into swimming pools fully dressed, claiming it was just to lighten the mood, while my mother sipped champagne and told everyone I was too serious. On family trips, he would force me to sing songs or recite lines in front of relatives, cutting me off mid-sentence to point out how ungraceful I sounded, making sure I never forgot that silence was safer. These moments piled up year after year until they became a pattern so familiar I could anticipate it like clockwork. My mother was never the rescuer. She was the accomplice. When I cried as a child after being humiliated in front of neighbors, she would pat my back, but her voice was sharp with ridicule. "Stop overreacting," she would say. "You are too sensitive. You embarrass us." She framed my pain as weakness and my humiliation as deserved. If my father was the hammer, my mother was the echo that made sure the blows reverberated. Together, they created a cage where I could never win. If I laughed along, I was ridiculed for being fake. If I stayed quiet, I was mocked for being dull. If I defended myself, I was scolded for being disrespectful. Madison, my sister, thrived in that environment because she never needed to fear their scorn. She was the golden child, the constant example used against me. When she earned praise, it was because she was exceptional. When I earned praise, it was dismissed as luck or unimportant. My father told guests proudly that Madison was destined for greatness, then turned to me with a chuckle and added, "And she will need to support her sister too, because we do not expect much from that one." Guests laughed uncomfortably, but no one spoke against him. His word was law. I lived in a world where cruelty was brushed off as humor, where abuse was disguised as tradition, where silence was demanded, and obedience was rewarded only with less humiliation, never with respect. The violence was not always physical, but it was relentless. The shove into the pool left me shivering and humiliated. The grip on my arm at parties left bruises he insisted were accidents. The constant jabs and verbal barbs carved deeper wounds than any belt could. He believed control kept the family strong, and my mother reinforced that belief with her approval. When I complained about fairness, she told me life is not fair. When I begged for understanding, she told me to toughen up. And all the while, Madison smirked from her safe pedestal, enjoying the show because my humiliation meant her glory shone brighter. This cycle taught me one thing clearly, that in their eyes, I was not a daughter, but an accessory, a canvas for their jokes, a contrast to highlight their golden child. Each time I was pushed down, each time I was silenced, each time I was dismissed, the resentment grew inside me. I swallowed it for years, convincing myself survival meant acceptance. But deep down, I carried the knowledge that their power existed only as long as I played my role. The control and the constant violence shaped me into someone who knew exactly what weakness looked like, and eventually it would teach me how to turn that knowledge back on them. The dinner that changed everything began like so many others, with polished plates and forced smiles, with the scent of garlic potatoes and roast beef filling the air, with wine glasses clinking as my father prepared to dominate the evening. He thrived on these nights' moments where every seat was filled, every eye on him, every laugh waiting for his cue. The chandelier above glowed warmly, as though it were lighting a stage rather than a dining room. I knew the rhythm of these nights, the rise and fall of his booming voice, the way guests leaned forward, eager for his stories of triumph, the way my mother added her soft laugh at exactly the right moments, the way Madison soaked in praise as if it were sunlight. My role was silence the shadow in the corner of the performance, but silence never lasted. It was only a matter of time before the spotlight shifted to me. That night it came during one of his self-congratulatory tales, a story about a business deal where he supposedly outsmarted everyone in the room. He finished with a flourish, guests clapped politely, and then my uncle tried to change the subject. He turned to me with a smile that carried the awkwardness of someone desperate to include the forgotten daughter. "So, tell us about your job," he said kindly. My heart skipped, not because of fear, but because of the rare chance to speak as an equal. I opened my mouth and began just a few words about the project I was working on, but the sound barely left my lips before my father cut in. "She has always been better seen than heard," he said, raising his glass as though it were the cleverest toast of the night. Laughter rolled across the table, soft at first, then bolder as others joined in. My throat tightened, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. He was not satisfied. He leaned closer, his grin stretching wide, his voice louder than the clinking of cutlery. "You know what he declared. Let's make her useful. She is not contributing to the conversation, so let her contribute to the decor." The words hung heavy in the air for a moment, a mix of confusion and amusement flickering across the guests' faces. Before I could react, before I could protest, his hand came down firmly on the back of my head. In one swift, brutal motion, he shoved me forward. My face slammed into the plate, mashed potatoes and gravy, exploding outward, meat pressing against my cheek, the heat searing my skin. The sharp edge of the plate cut lightly against my face. pain mingling with the sting of humiliation. Gasps filled the room, followed instantly by laughter. It was a spectacle exactly the kind of show he loved, and he sat back in triumph as though he had just delivered his masterpiece. "There," he announced, proudly pointing at me while my hair clung wet with sauce. "Now she matches the table." More laughter erupted, glasses clinked again, phones rose to capture the moment, and in the chaos of humiliation, I caught the cruelest detail of all. My mother, dressed elegantly with diamonds glimmering at her neck, lifted her glass, took a long sip, and then laughed. It was not the laugh of someone embarrassed for me, not the laugh of someone caught off guard, but the deliberate, delighted laugh of a woman enjoying the cruelty. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowed with disdain, and she said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "At least now you are worth looking at." The room erupted once more this time with a sharper edge because she had sanctioned the joke. My chest constricted, my ears rang, my cheeks burned not just from the food but from the humiliation that had soaked into my very skin. Phones recorded cousins whispered, some guests chuckled awkwardly, but none stood up to stop him. I sat there trembling, wiping my face with a napkin that could not erase the shame. I wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the floor, to run from the room and never return, but something stronger flared inside me. Beneath the humiliation, beneath the rage, there was a strange clarity. I understood in that moment that this was not just another cruel joke. This was proof public and undeniable, captured on every phone in that room. My father thought he had staged the perfect humiliation. My mother thought she had sealed it with her cutting words, but they had given me something far more powerful than they realized. They had given me evidence, and with it the possibility of revenge so perfect it could tear down the image they worshipped more than anything else. The dinner continued as though nothing had happened, but for me the world had cracked open. I sat with food still clinging to my hair, the taste of salt and grease thick in my mouth, my napkin useless against the humiliation that had soaked into my skin. Every bite I forced down afterward tasted like ash, like the weight of everyone's silence pressing harder than the shove itself. Around me, laughter ebbed and flowed, stories resumed, glasses clinked, and cameras flashed as though my degradation had been just another form of entertainment for the night. No one intervened, no one challenged my father, no one offered me even a shred of dignity. I looked at faces that belonged to people who shared my blood, and all I saw was complicity. Some cousins smirked as they replayed the video on their phones, tilting the screens away when I glanced toward them, pretending they were not guilty when the truth was written across their smirking mouths. My father leaned back in his chair, satisfied his pride, swelling his voice, carrying as he told another story to wipe away the moment as if it had been no more than a joke. My mother sat poised with her wine glass, her laughter still echoing in my ears, her eyes darting toward me now and then with the same cold amusement she had shown when she delivered her cruel line. Madison smirked, openly pleased with the gift she had been handed, my humiliation becoming her ammunition for weeks and months to come. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I picked at the food on my plate, knowing that if I showed tears, he would win, knowing that if I tried to leave the table, it would only add to his victory. So I endured. I forced myself to breathe, to sit upright, to survive the minutes until I could excuse myself. Each second was a test, each laugh another knife twisting deeper, but I held still, silent, invisible in the corner of their stage. When the meal ended and people drifted into clusters for photos and conversation, I slipped away, muttering something about the bathroom. Behind the locked door, I faced the mirror and nearly did not recognize the person staring back. My reflection was streaked with gravy, my hair plastered against my face, my makeup smeared into blackened shadows beneath my eyes. I looked like the punchline he wanted me to be, yet my eyes burned not with tears, but with something hotter, steadier. My chest tightened, but not with the urge to cry. It was anger rage kept silent for years, rage that had no outlet until now. I leaned on the sink, staring into the glass, and felt a shift inside me. All my life I had been taught that silence was safety, that obedience was survival, that enduring cruelty was the only way to exist in that house. But in that moment, staring at my own broken reflection, I knew silence had become its own prison. And then it hit me sudden and electric, a thought that raced through my mind so quickly it left me breathless. Everyone in that room had been filming. Every laugh, every gasp, every cruel smirk had been captured by the very devices my father loved so much. He adored the cameras because they celebrated him, because they preserved his polished image. But tonight, those same cameras had recorded his mask slipping. Tonight, they had given me proof. My humiliation was not hidden behind closed doors. It was carved into memory cards and stored in photo albums on their phones. And for the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of power flicker in my chest. Alone in that bathroom, food drying against my cheek, I understood that I had something stronger than his grip or her laughter. I had evidence. I stayed in the bathroom longer than I needed to, breathing in the silence, gripping the edge of the sink until my knuckles turned white, my reflection daring me to collapse but refusing to give me permission. The sting of gravy against my skin had begun to fade, replaced by the deeper burn of realization that for the first time I held something my father could not control. His hand might have forced me down, but in doing so, he had unleashed something he could never shove back into silence. When I walked out of that room, the laughter still circled the table, but I no longer heard it the same way. Each laugh was a record, each smirk a witness, each camera a weapon that could be turned against him. For years he had thrived on the attention of an audience, but now that same audience had become his undoing. I looked at the phones in people's hands, and I felt a current of possibility pulse through me. My humiliation was captured from multiple angles, frozen in time, undeniable, and I realized the balance of power had shifted. For once, the joke was not just on me, it was also on him. He believed his reputation untouchable, his image flawless, his control absolute. Yet here was proof carved into digital memory that showed the world exactly who he was when the performance cracked. I sat back down at the table quieter than ever, but my silence was no longer defeat. It was strategy. I watched carefully, taking note of who held their phones high, who replayed clips, who shared them with a laugh. I did not need all of them. I only needed one, maybe two, the right angles, the right words, and the illusion he lived for would collapse under its own weight. For years, I had begged for someone to believe me, for someone to see the truth behind the perfect photographs and the staged laughter, but the truth had always been hidden behind closed doors. Not anymore. Now the evidence was in plain sight, saved in the pockets of relatives who thought they were just capturing another family joke. That thought became my anchor. Instead of sinking beneath the weight of shame, I felt myself rise above it, building something steady in my chest, something sharp. I began to imagine what it would look like to turn his own obsession with image into his destruction. Every smile he flashed for the camera, every word about family values, every glass raised in a toast would mean nothing once the truth came out. I chewed slowly, forcing food down past the knot in my throat, but each bite carried less humiliation and more resolve. I knew then that survival would no longer be about silence. It would be about using his weapons against him. My father loved the spotlight, and the spotlight would be the very thing that consumed him. That was the seed planted in me that night, the moment humiliation turned into rebellion. Over the next 2 days, I became someone else, not the quiet daughter lurking in the corner, but the patient hunter moving carefully among the same people who had laughed at my pain. I knew I could not storm into the middle of the room demanding justice. My father had too much sway, too much power to twist words into jokes and paint me as dramatic. What I needed was proof undeniable and sharp, and I knew where to find it. Phones had been out the entire night, glowing like beacons, capturing every detail from the smear of gravy on my face to the triumphant smirk on his lips. All I had to do was collect enough of it to build something he could never laugh away. I started with Dylan, my 14-year-old cousin who was addicted to his phone and eager to be treated like an adult. I caught him alone in the kitchen, phone in his hand, replaying the clip as if it were the funniest thing he had ever seen. I forced a smile, kept my tone light, and said, "Send that to me. I need it for memories." He grinned, delighted to be included, and within minutes the video was on my phone. His angle was close clear, capturing my father's words with painful precision. "Make yourself useful as decor," followed by the roar of laughter. My jaw tightened as I watched, but I forced myself to breathe to save the file and thank him casually, as if he had done nothing more than share a harmless joke. Later, my Aunt Sherry sent me a shaky vertical shot, the gasp from the table audible my father's hand pressing my head down, the laughter rising like a cruel choir. Then my cousin Ashley forwarded the clearest one of all full view of the table, my mother sipping wine with her satisfied smirk as my father leaned back, proud and gleeful. 3 angles, 3 nails for the coffin, and I knew there were more if I pushed. But 3 was enough. Proof from different perspectives, the moment undeniable, the cruelty plain to anyone who watched. Still, I wanted it to be more than just raw footage. I wanted it to be the story he could never escape, a story told in his own words and gestures framed by the very image he tried so hard to protect. I spent hours alone in my room replaying the clips until the sound of laughter became fuel rather than torment. I began weaving them together, not cutting anything out, only arranging them so the hypocrisy was clear. First, a clip of my father speaking about family values, his voice proud, his glass raised high. Then a slow fade into the shove, the plate my face rising, covered in food. Next, the angle of my mother's laugh, her cruel words echoing, "At least now you are worth looking at." Then Dylan's close shot with the entire table laughing, each face exposed. Between each clip, I inserted text, bold white words on black, a father's joke, a family's laughter, a daughter's humiliation. The rhythm built itself, his mask crumbling frame by frame. Watching it play made my stomach twist, but it also made me smile. Not because it erased the pain, but because it meant the pain was no longer hidden. For once, the cameras were on my side. When I finished the montage, I did not upload it to the internet. This was not about viral revenge. This was about destroying him in the one place he cared most in the eyes of the people he worshipped for approval. He wanted their admiration more than money, more than love, more than anything, and I would use that hunger against him. I saved the file on a drive and hid it carefully close enough to reach when the right moment arrived. For the first time in years, I felt something close to power, not imagined but real, tucked safely in my pocket. The opportunity came faster than I expected, and it almost felt like fate had placed it into my hands. A week after the dinner, my parents announced they would be hosting another event, a slideshow for the extended family and close friends to celebrate what they called a night to remember. They wanted to gather everyone again to relive the supposed joy, to bathe once more in admiration and applause. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud because I already knew the night would be remembered, but not in the way they intended. They had rented the same banquet hall, ordered expensive catering, hired a photographer, all to reinforce the illusion of a perfect family. My father spoke about the slideshow as if it were his crowning achievement, a collection of memories that would prove how united and admirable we were. He imagined his reputation glowing brighter with every photo, every video clip, every staged smile. He had no idea that the real slideshow, the one I had crafted in the quiet of my room, was waiting on a small drive in my bag. For days, I played along smiling when asked, helping my mother with decorations, even advising Madison on which dress made her look more glamorous. They believed my silence meant defeat, that humiliation had broken me. But silence had become my armor. Every time I nodded obediently, they moved closer to the trap without realizing it. I studied the layout of the hall, the placement of the projector, the moment the lights would dim and the attention would turn to the screen. I remembered from past events exactly where the USB port was located, exactly how the system worked, exactly when I could slip in unnoticed. My heart pounded each night as I rehearsed it in my mind, the steps precise, the timing flawless. It was not adrenaline alone, it was the knowledge that for once I would hold the strings of the performance, that for once he would be powerless. On the night of the event, I dressed plainly, not seeking attention, blending into the background as I always had. My father thrived in the spotlight, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, clapping old friends on the back. My mother floated beside him, elegant and polished. Madison took selfies with anyone who would pose, basking in the glow of being the golden child. I waited until they were all distracted, the crowd buzzing, the servers carrying trays of overpriced appetizers, and then I moved. My steps were steady, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears, but my hands did not tremble. I walked straight to the projector table, slipped the drive into the port, cued the file, and replaced the original slideshow in less than 10 seconds. No one noticed. No one questioned the background noise of chatter covering my quiet rebellion. When I stepped away, my chest felt tight with anticipation. It was not fear anymore. It was clarity. In a matter of minutes, the same crowd that had laughed at me would watch him stripped bare, the mask ripped away, the truth undeniable. I sat near the back, angled so I could see both the screen and my parents' faces. My father beamed with pride, ready to bask in more praise. My mother leaned close to him with her practiced smile. Madison adjusted her hair for the perfect shot. They believed they owned the night. They had no idea the stage was mine. The lights dimmed slowly until the room hushed, the chatter fading into expectant silence as the projector flickered to life. A title slide appeared, a night to remember, the same words my father had chosen ironic in a way that made my chest tighten with anticipation. My father leaned forward in his seat at the front, his posture proud, his grin wide, his hand resting on my mother's as though they were the king and queen of this staged kingdom. Madison leaned toward them for the perfect photo op her phone, ready to capture what she believed would be another golden moment for our family. Around me, people smiled, eyes fixed on the glowing screen, murmurs of recognition when the first images appeared, champagne glasses clinking lightly in the dark. The slideshow began innocently enough. Stock images of champagne flutes, polished family portraits from earlier in the evening posed smiles that looked flawless under dim lighting. My father chuckled softly, whispering to my mother, already soaking in the approval he expected. But then the screen shifted. The first clip rolled not of staged happiness, but of my father himself standing tall at the dinner table, glass raised, delivering his pompous speech about the importance of respect and family values. His voice boomed through the speakers, clear, commanding every word, preserved with painful precision. Heads nodded. Relatives smiled politely in the footage. The audience murmured, now some whispering how good he looked on camera. Then the scene faded, the background audio of his speech still carrying through, and suddenly the slow motion began. His hand caught on Dylan's camera, pressing against the back of my head, shoving me into the plate with ruthless force. The sound of laughter replaced his speech, the cruel chorus echoing from every angle. Gasps erupted in the banquet hall. The silence that followed was suffocating. On screen, my face lifted from the plate, streaked with potatoes and gravy, strands of hair plastered against my cheek, eyes wide with humiliation. The screen froze on that image, projected larger than life, undeniable. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening, but the footage did not stop. Another angle appeared, Ashley's recording, showing my mother calmly sipping her wine, her lips curling into a satisfied smirk, as though my pain was her entertainment. At least now you are worth looking at, her voice carried through the speakers, clear, sharp, cruel. A ripple of disgust moved through the room. Someone muttered, "That is not funny." Another whispered, "Is this real?" Then Dylan's video came close and merciless, capturing my father's triumphant grin, his words echoing, "Make yourself useful as decor," followed by the explosion of laughter. Each clip cut deeper than the last, each perspective hammering the truth further into the minds of the audience. Between the clips, bold white words appeared: a father's joke, a family's laughter, a daughter's humiliation. The banquet hall was silent except for the shifting of chairs, the uncomfortable coughs, the whispers that carried like thunder in the quiet. My father's eyes darted wildly across the crowd, his face pale, his hand tightening on the table as though he could hold on to control, slipping through his fingers. My mother's glass shook in her hand, the liquid rippling dangerously close to spilling, her smile frozen and cracked. Madison had stopped taking selfies, her eyes locked on me with an expression of shock that quickly twisted into fury as she realized what was happening. The montage continued, shifting from that night to older clips I had found, little humiliations captured by careless relatives at past gatherings, moments that had seemed like jokes but now formed a pattern. Him shoving me into a pool at a wedding, laughter ringing as I stumbled, soaked and humiliated. His voice mocking me at a barbecue, telling neighbors I would never amount to much. My mother's whispers caught on tape, dismissing me as not like Madison. Intercut with these were polished family photos, perfect holiday cards, staged smiles posted online. The hypocrisy screamed from the screen, undeniable, irrefutable. The audience shifted further, some with arms crossed, some whispering harshly to each other. Mr. Harlan, one of my father's longtime business contacts, leaned forward, his face dark with disgust. My father tried to stand to speak over the video to wave it away as a misunderstanding, but the projector was louder than him, the truth drowning out every excuse he tried to form. Then came the final blow. A clip from that very night, my own recording in the bathroom mirror gravy still streaked through my hair, my eyes glassy but unbroken. I looked into the lens and said, "This is what respect looks like in our family." The words froze on screen, the image of my face locked with theirs, and then the fade to black carried the final text, "A night to remember for all the right reasons." The lights flickered back on, illuminating a room heavy with silence, the kind of silence that weighs like a stone. No applause, no polite laughter, only the sound of chairs creaking as people shifted uncomfortably, eyes refusing to meet my father's. His jaw clenched, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to recover, but the performance was over. The audience had seen the truth. The silence in the hall did not last long because whispers began to rise, a wave of murmured judgment that filled the space louder than applause ever could. My father stood trying to salvage what remained of his reputation, his voice trembling, though he fought to sound steady. It was all in good fun, he insisted. Just a joke taken out of context. But no one was laughing anymore. Guests who had once hung on his every word now stared at him with narrowed eyes, their expressions carrying disgust and disappointment. My mother reached for her wine glass, but her hand shook so badly the stem rattled against the table before she set it down. Her lips pressed into a thin line that could not disguise the panic behind her eyes. Madison turned in her chair, her eyes blazing at me, but the fury of a sister could not drown out the judgment of an entire room. Mr. Harlan, my father's longtime business partner, pushed back his chair and stood abruptly. "I think we have seen enough," he said coldly, and walked out without offering his usual handshake. The sight of him leaving sent a ripple through the crowd, others rising quickly to follow. 3 couples left in silence, their faces grim, their footsteps echoing like nails hammered into the coffin of my father's image. My father tried to call after them, laughter forced into his voice, saying they were overreacting, saying this was all staged fun. But the more he spoke, the hollower his words became. He had built his reputation on the illusion of strength and charm, but now the illusion lay shattered, and the fragments cut him with every breath. The room that once adored him had turned cold. Conversations shifted into hushed tones, relatives leaning toward one another. Eyes-wide words slipping into ears that spread faster than fire. "Did you see the way he shoved her?" one whispered. "I had no idea," another replied. Aunt Sherry's face was pale as she looked at me, murmuring to her husband, "I cannot believe we laughed." My father's face reddened, veins pulsing at his temples, his hand slamming once against the table in desperation, demanding that everyone remember all the good he had done, demanding that they not judge him by one little joke. But it was not one joke, and the montage had made that painfully clear. It was years of cruelty wrapped neatly into evidence they could not unsee. My mother tried to smooth things over, her voice thin and brittle as she spoke of family traditions and playful teasing, but her words rang false. The guests had seen the smirk on her face, had heard the venom in her words. "At least now you are worth looking at," and no amount of spin could erase it. Madison hissed at me across the table. "You think this makes you look better," but her words were drowned beneath the heavy atmosphere of a family exposed. I did not answer her. I did not need to. Every eye in the room spoke for me. My father's legacy had crumbled in real time, his empire of charm collapsing beneath the weight of his own cruelty. For once, I did not feel small. I did not feel invisible. I did not feel like the quiet one in the corner. I felt like the truth itself, undeniable and sharp, and I knew the damage could not be undone. The cameras he loved so much had finally betrayed him, and the witnesses who once clapped for him now turned away. The collapse was not loud, not explosive, but it was absolute, and he could never rebuild the mask that had shattered before them. I rose from my chair slowly, the sound of it scraping against the floor, sharp enough to draw eyes toward me, though I did not need their attention anymore. Every step I took felt like the click of a lock turning on a door I had kept closed for years. My father was still speaking, his voice desperate now, demanding to be heard, demanding to reshape the story even as it slipped out of his control. My mother's eyes darted between the guests, searching for someone willing to offer a lifeline, but no one moved. Madison sat rigid, her glare locked on me, but even she understood the tide had shifted. I did not hurry. I walked slowly through the rows of tables, my bag hanging from my shoulder, the weight of the drive no longer heavy because its purpose was finished. Around me, guests whispered, but their voices no longer stung, they no longer carried the power of judgment. For the first time, I realized their opinions could not wound me because I had already shown them the truth. My liberation did not come from their approval. It came from the silence that followed my father's downfall, a silence that was mine. I reached the door at the back of the hall and paused for a moment, turning to look at them one last time. My father was standing, his face pale, his hand raised as if he could hold the air itself and twist it back into his control, his words tripping over one another as he insisted it had been taken out of context. My mother clutched her wine glass with white knuckles. Her polished exterior cracked, her reputation slipping through her fingers like spilled liquid. Madison's expression was a mixture of fury and fear. Fury that I had shattered the pedestal she stood on, and fear that without the pedestal she was nothing more than another daughter in a fractured family. I said nothing. I did not need to. The truth had been spoken louder than any words I could add. I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool night air, the chill rushing against my skin like freedom itself. I breathed deeply, the first real breath I felt I had taken in years, my lungs expanding not with humiliation or fear, but with relief. Behind me, the noise of the hall grew distant, muffled by the heavy door, as though I were leaving not just a room, but an entire chapter of my life. The street was quiet. The stars faint above the world outside, utterly indifferent to the chaos I had left behind, and that indifference was liberating. I walked without hurry, my steps steady, my shoulders lighter with every block I put between myself and them. I did not need the files anymore. I did not need to replay the videos. I did not need to hold on to the proof. The proof was etched into the minds of every guest who had sat in that hall, into every whisper they carried out the door, into every silence that met my father's frantic excuses. My liberation was not just escape from their house or their rules, it was the knowledge that I had ended the performance. For once, the stage was not his, it was mine, and I had chosen to walk away. That night, I was no longer the quiet one in the corner. I was the author of the ending. The morning after the slideshow, the sun rose the same as always, yet everything felt different because the weight that had pressed down on me for years was gone. I woke not to the sound of my father's voice demanding obedience, or my mother's sharp whispers reminding me to behave, but to silence. A silence that belonged entirely to me. News traveled quickly through the family circle. I did not need to call anyone or explain anything. Relatives whispered to one another the story of the dinner and the footage from the slideshow spreading like wildfire. The truth passed along in fragments that painted a full picture of who my parents really were. For once, I did not dread being the topic of conversation. For once, the whispers did not carry shame, but justice. I deleted the files from my phone because I no longer needed them. Their existence in my possession had been power, but their impact in the minds of those who witnessed them was permanent and irreversible. My father's business partners distanced themselves. Calls went unanswered, meetings canceled, contracts dissolved quietly. My mother no longer received invitations to the luncheons. She adored her carefully constructed social circle, crumbling without the foundation of admiration. Madison sulked in silence. Her pedestal demolished, her smirk wiped away when she realized the glow of favoritism had turned to ash. Their collapse was not my doing alone. It was their own cruelty played back to them. Their own laughter turned into evidence, their own pride burned into humiliation. My justice came not from revenge posted to the world, but from the intimate destruction of their mask in front of the very people they sought to impress. I thought I might feel guilty, but I did not. Instead, I felt free. I walked through the city streets without the invisible chains of their voices clamped to my back. I looked into mirrors and no longer saw a shadow of a daughter, no longer saw a punchline, no longer saw an accessory to their show. I saw myself steady, scarred perhaps, but unbroken, and that vision was stronger than any lie they had ever told. Liberation did not roar like thunder. It whispered in the quiet of my own choices, in the peace of knowing I had taken back my story. I realized then that family is not defined by blood or by the images we are forced to present. Family is defined by truth, by respect, by love that does not wound. I had not been given that kind of family by birth, but I had given it to myself by standing up, by refusing to remain silent, by using the tools of their vanity to expose them. For once, the lesson was mine to teach, and the audience had already learned it. People often say justice is slow, but for me, justice arrived the moment the screen lit up with the truth, the moment silence fell heavy in that hall, the moment no one laughed anymore. Justice was not only in their downfall, but in my freedom to walk away, to breathe, to exist without their cruelty defining me. And so I stepped into a new life with no applause, no spotlight, just the steady knowledge that the performance was over and I was finally free.